the Undercut podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we are back to review the ninth race of the Formula One 2024 season, the Canadian Grand Prix. And to do this, I'm joined by Thiemo Albus-Daly and Ellie Mae Taylor. How are you both?
Positively dandy, thank you very much. We've had quite a good weekend of racing just throughout at least all the categories I watch. I don't know about the categories I don't watch. I assume the racing was admirable. But in the racing I did watch, it was excellent. So looking forward to talking about what is arguably, and correctly, the best race of the year so far.
It has been a very good one. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone watched the IndyCar or Indy Next across the weekend. I know we'll touch on it. There's been some
Factually
good
obliged.
racing. Yeah. Ellie Mae, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. In some ways, I feel quite therapeutic. I think it's because I shouted at men kicking a ball on Friday because I went to Wembley to watch England play against Iceland as our sort of Euro send-off.
We lost to a supermarket.
We lost, yeah.
It was quite
But
impressive.
I found out that I can't control my emotions and progressively my shouting gets louder and louder.
I mean, you're going to be doing similar amounts of shouting next weekend this weekend coming when we go rallying, and you're the one navigating and telling me to speed up, slow down, or turn left. So it's possibly
If
going
those
to
are
be
the
just as
only things she's
therapeutic.
shouting at you, then I will be amazed.
Yeah. I mean, there might be other words included in the sort of
Please have dash cam
plethora.
and all the rest of it. I want this to be a bonus episode of the pod. Just don't. It'd be like the pub quiz. We won't edit it. We'll just put it on and let people enjoy as Eddie May goes through every single possible swear word in every known language.
There will be a video from this, hopefully. I'm looking forward to it's just going to be a good bit of fun. We've got a rally around Oxfordshire, we've got regularities, trials, and late 1950s Austin Healey Frog Ice Sprite, which is all rally prepped and ready to go. So should be a good laugh. But in the meantime, the Grand Prix was a good laugh this weekend, the Canadian Grand Prix. But we'll get to that because first, obviously, the big news was the unveiling of the 2026 Formula One regulations. And I'm intrigued.
I think F1 are truly trying to entice Adrian Newey back into the sport. I don't think they're ready to let him go yet.
I mean, minimum weight down 30 kilos from the 2022 specs. We're now down to 768 kilos. Downforce has been reduced by 30% and drag reduced by 55%, which is interesting. A redesigned power unit featuring increased battery power and an even split between internal combustion engine and electric power, plus the use of 100% sustainable fuels, really advances it along quite a lot, and is reportedly one of the big things that drew Audi into the sort of talking pot for joining and eventually taking over Sauber. The 2026 cars will be switchable between two configurations as well to either minimize fuel consumption or maximize cornering performance. So we've got, I think it's called the X mode is for straight line speed, isn't it? And then Z mode is for cornering. So essentially, it gives you sort of like DRS but for corners. It's quite interesting. Essentially, the idea is that it will be an active aerodynamic system involving movable front and rear wing planes, and allow for greater cornering speeds with different wing angles and equally lower drag along the straight lines. So that's quite interesting and technical. We don't know if it's going to be replacing DRS as a sort of overtaking mechanism or not, but there will be something more akin to what we know from IndyCar as the push to pass system, getting on the button, the MG UK override system, which provides 350 kilowatts all the way up to 337 kilometers an hour, or an extra half a megajoule of energy. And it can be used anytime a driver is within 1 second of the car in front. Again, not clear if this is replacing or simply an addition to DRS. But it looks like it's a replacement at the time of writing. So gone are the old DRS trains, and in comes the MG UK override, or I guarantee you it'll just be called push to pass.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to make of these just yet because we could say an awful lot about them, but again, we just don't know quite what it's going to manifest itself into. The photos of what the cars should look promising. It's kind of better than what I was expecting to see better than what I saw in 2022 because I was hoping something a bit more radical in 22 and I was like, oh, is that it? And interestingly, if you read the regulations in a certain way, it kind of subtly confesses that this era of regulations hasn't worked in the way that they were advertised, but they're not saying it in capital letters. It's just kind of you take the third letter from every fourth word and it spells out this didn't go quite to plan. But I'm kind of like you. I'm intrigued. I'm hopeful, and I think right now I just don't want to get fooled again in the same way that I was in 2022, and I prefer 2014 new style regulations in terms of the switcheroo around. Red Bull was still there, but Mercedes, this team that were decidedly midfield, just came out of nowhere. And it'd be great to see that from Williams or Haas or someone like this, where not necessarily to the domination, because I don't want more domination, but just holy shit, Haas have won a Grand Prix, and it's in the second half of the season as well as the first half. They haven't just put all their eggs in the first basket and won in Bahrain and then tailed off. They've actually managed to do something. So cautiously optimistic.
Well, this is why I don't really know how to feel about the regulations at the moment, because it's like we're finally kind of getting the close racing these regulations were meant to give us. And I'm not saying the new regulations won't give us close racing. It may bunch the pack up even more, but it could give us a dominant team again, as they're the ones that master the new regulations. I don't know. I don't feel like we've had enough time to let every sort of the teams really settle into these set of regulations and get the close racing that we need from these yet.
Would Ellie May mind, though, if the domination was taken over by Williams? That's the real kicker. So what she thinks about that, I think that
Depends who the
these last few
driver is.
races, these last few races, we've seen it get closer, but it's kind of we're not sure if this is just a long flash in the pan or if it's something akin to 2021, because we're hoping for 2021 style closeness next year, as that'll be last year, the regulations. It's typical, you get competitive and then we switch things. But we're seeing tantalizing teasers of it now, but we need to see more of it because, as we may talk about later, Spain and Austria are kind of the litmus test to see if Red Bull truly are losing their touch, or if it's just been an unfortunate few tracks that they've had lately and circumstances have been beyond their control. If it's the former, then we're in for another kind of girlish season with the odd bits of interesting stuff here or there. But if not, then we've potentially got a game on our hands. But again, for 2026, I think I want it to be like this weekend in some ways. I don't mind who wins as long as it's close and we get to see some really kind of ball to the wall thinking from teams lower down who have nothing to lose. And if Max still wins, Max still wins, but at least he's only winning by like 0.3 of a second.
I think when it comes to the ongoing state of Red Bull, I'm going to be pessimistic and say I think we've seen two circuits back to back now that are not Red Bull favoured circuits. Certainly, the amount of curb riding that Montreal takes and the fact that Monaco is quite a bumpy circuit, it means you have to run a slightly higher ride height, just meant that the Red Bull wasn't in its comfort zone. And certainly this weekend, that was again exemplified in the difference in pace between the two drivers. I think when we go to Spain, which is next, and then certainly Silverstone and Austria, three very smooth, very nicely tarmac circuits, we're going to see a closing up of the space between Verstappen and Perez, and possibly the Red Bulls pulling away a bit more pace-wise. When it comes to that sort of reflecting into the 2026 regulations, I think because this is so sort of multifaceted, we're going to see teams that have various different strengths in the way that previously we've seen some cars be sort of straight line weapons, some cars have really good sort of mid corner or sort of slow speed corner. This is something I think we're going to see teams sort of have their own little areas of forte. And as we go to different circuits through the calendar, we're going to naturally get this variety and naturally get fighting around the lap. If you've got cars that are better able to deploy the Z and X system, if you've got cars that are better able to deploy the push to pass system, if you've got cars that have better sort of finessed the new power unit and getting to grips with the new fuels, you're going to have 3 or 4 different sort of fields in which a car could sort of not necessarily specialize, but have a greater forte over its rivals. And that's going to be interesting. The question will be how long until the field essentially homologates itself and everything gets closer and closer and closer to the point that we have seen this season or this set of technical regulations around. But what we've seen with this set of technical regulations is as the cars have homologated more and more and more, the racing has gotten better and better as the cars get closer, as the McLarens, the Mercedes, the Ferraris get closer to the Red Bull. We've seen the racing get better. it's not because the Red Bull's gotten any worse. It's because everyone else has sort of figured out what to do. It's annoying that
I
all of
do
a
also
sudden we're
think it's
moving on
quite
from that.
amusing that you pitch the idea of everyone having the same car, and a lot of the fan base revolts. But then you kind of are doing that. You're just letting them find their own way about getting close to the same thing. It's just seeing who can do the best version of it, and then we'll all slowly make the same car and fool ourselves into thinking that it's a different car because it's ever so slightly different when you're essentially just making the same car.
Because
It's
if
it's one
you,
of those
yeah,
interesting things where I'd like to see less of that in 26, and potentially that's what the configuration aspect of it is partly to do with, where
mm,
yeah, they might be similar, but there'll be significant changes you can make, which maybe one week you'll decide to do this, maybe one week you'll decide to do that, but it gives that variety in there still so that you can get close, but you won't be able to to be inspired like Racing Point were in 2020, for example.
I think we'll see a lot of variation initially, for sure, especially of how you interpret the regulations. And I mean, obviously, we haven't seen what the regulations are, but at the minute, it looks fairly open. And I assume F1 will eventually sort of clamp down and get stricter on what those regulations and technicalities actually mean.
I think the best way I can look at it at the moment is, as we've seen pretty much with every iteration of sort of the modern era of the sport, so say from 2008 onwards roughly, or 2005 onwards, is we've seen what biologists and sort of zoologists call carcinization. Basically everything becomes crab, and it's this weird theory that, or not theory, proven fact, that over time crabs have evolved about 7 or 8 different times. Essentially everything is deemed like the perfect body plan, and with F1 cars we do see this sort of clustering down on sort of one specific design and style point. And we're starting to get to that with the current season. I think the previous technical regulations were so long lived, we actually saw everything converge on one point and then start to diverse again. And we certainly saw that with the Red Bulls. In fact, they got to the end of 2021 and they were so radically different in their angle of attack, in their aero rakes down the side from the rest of the field. And that was what made it quite an interesting season. But now we've started sort of 2022, everyone was all over the gaff. And now everyone's sort of worked back into one format that really does seem to work. We're going to start with everyone all over the gaff, but possibly in more diverse ways than we actually anticipate. I don't think we ought to sort of dwell on this too much, or else we'll get completely sidetracked into the full technical aspects of it, because there is a lot more to really pick apart. And what we've been told so far is a relatively condensed version of what these new rules mean. We've just sort of been told, this is what the cars are going to have, this is what the cars are going to have, this is what the cars are going to have. We haven't been given the full sort of, everything has to be within X millimeters of data plane Z of this, of that, of this rotation. And that's going to be when the interesting bits come out. And that's going to be the stuff that gets your Adrian Newey's, your Ross Brauns, your sort of proper technical directors salivating, going, okay, this is exactly what they want us to do, but this is something they've neglected to tell us to not do. And that's going to be where the fun comes from.
Do you know who I think would have loved? Or two people, I think, actually. Colin Chapman and Gordon Murray.
Yes. Certainly with the movable aero, I think this would fall really into actually both of them. They both really pioneered different aero things. Chapman with the wings, and then of course Murray with the fan cars and sort of double chassis and everything. This would be sort of prime Gordon Murray territory. But anyway, we'll move on from technical regulations to the forming of the grid for future years. We sort of know what the cars are going to be like, but now we're also getting to know a few more of the drivers that are going to be there. Of course, we had Sergio Perez's contract confirmed, and we'll get onto that in a bit. I've certainly got some words to say on Sergio Perez. But at the other side of the Red Bull driver paddock is Yuki Tsunoda, who extends with RB until the end of 2025. So it's another year contract. And I think across the weekend, Christian Horner might have given away a bit too much, actually, on why Yuki was only given a year at RB. But he'll now spend a 5th season with the team. And also, reportedly, when we're talking about smaller/younger drivers, Ollie Behrman is reported to have now signed with Haas for 2025. And Mercedes stated that they've turned down Carlos Sainz as they want to focus on their revolutionary talent that is Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's currently 6th in F2 and has yet to score a race win, let alone a podium or a pole position. So, yeah, some interesting pointers there.
think Tsunoda, a fifth season with the team, and after the performance so far this year, it's not surprising considering there's no room at the Red Bull Inn for him to go. And if you're looking at the other realistic options right now, eh. And I mean, it's one of those interesting things that given how he performed last year, they were saying in commentary over the weekend that he's either already scored more points this year or had more points finishes this year, or both than he did in all of last year. So it's automatically interesting for me that he got an extension for this year when Lawson was right there, but that's a fun what if for another day. It's just a fun observation. But
He
when next to
annoyingly,
him,
he annoyingly last year, didn't he just keep getting 11th position?
yeah, which is fair enough because again, the car was terrible, and I think that probably factored into why they gave him a fourth chance, a fourth season. But as for where next to him, Perez is on a 1+1, so potentially 26. But again, I think we'll see a lot of contracts a little bit like that 1 or 2 years, unless someone's really determined to stick with the team they've got and they've got full belief in it for well into the next set of regulations. Where this leaves Ricardo is interesting because I think Marco last year said already at the start of the year that Lawson was guaranteed a seat with RB for 25. Make of that what you will, because it's still Marco, but doesn't help Ricardo then. So he's obviously not had a brilliant season, which we'll get to later, but I don't think he'll mind too much if he gets the boot because he's been given that chance in some respects. And there's still the potential for IndyCar because we've got drivers there that were not great in F1, shall we say, and have absolutely flourished over there. So it'd be fascinating to see. The other potential option, which I'm just going to throw out there, is what if he joins Audi for 2025 on a 2-year contract and just see what the regulations do there. And I think Yuki then he can see and monitor what Perez is doing, how he does next year, if he makes it through all of the next year in the first place, and potentially then he steps up for 26. Or he goes somewhere else and this 1-year contract is perfect for that. I think you've seen a lot of that with these kind of drivers where I'll do a year or two, preferably a year. So I just want to see what's out there. I want to see how we do in 26, and then I will just up and leave you, and I will go wherever the hell looks better.
I think Yuki on the 1 year, and this is coming from sort of what Christian Horner has said about and alluded to, is because they know that Perez on this 1+1, basically the +1 is hugely performance related. And given what we've seen from him in the past 2 races, let alone the rest of this season, is going to be fundamental. And essentially what he's alluded to is the fact that they will likely be either ditching Perez or swapping him into the RB for Tsunoda come start of 2026. I would love
I
to
think if
see
I was
the
Perez and I
aggressive
was
Red
asked to
Bull
be
come
switched
back.
with Yuki, I would just leave and go somewhere else instead of taking the shame of going back to RB, because at least you could say, you know what, I couldn't perform in this car, and he leaves with some kind of dignity and goes somewhere else rather than he gets demoted and then how long does he stay there for? How many drivers does he get in the way of that want to come up from F2? Just have a more graceful exit that way.
But you say about drivers coming up from F2, I think this is why they've given Yuki that 1-year contract, is they anticipate moving him on, moving him up, because they need to put new drivers into that RB. And I mean, you look at the drivers they've got waiting in the wings. Lawson, we've already mentioned. Ayumu Iwasa, someone who we championed through F2, currently doing all right, I think, in Super Formula. I haven't checked in on him for a while. And then we've got the likes of, who's the really quick one in F2 at the moment?
The angry one, Hadjar,
Yeah, the really
yes.
Hadjar, the angry French boy. Like, you look at the talent that is bubbling away in those lower formula. I think Red Bull have gone, now we've got to start making moves to get them up. And I think that's why we haven't heard about Ricciardo's contract yet. I think that's why Perez is on the 1+1 with Tsunoda, with basically, you're doing 1 more year here and we're moving you up to the big boys team. You've proven it. He scored more this season than he did the entirety of last season. And even the season before that, it was last year 17 points, year before that 12. The year prior to that, his first year in Formula One, he came 14th with 32 points. But I think that was because he very much lucked into it at the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, finishing 4th, really giving him a sort of unexpected bolster of points at the last minute. So, yeah, I think Iwasa's certainly on the radar. Hadjar's certainly on the radar. I think that's what Red Bull are looking at when they sort of look at their other drivers. And I'll speak more on what I think about Perez on a more personal aspect later.
I think, obviously, the problem with Yuki is that he had a hard time coming into F1 because it sort of almost stemmed from, he's got that what was then AlphaTauri seat because they want to keep Honda happy. And then he sort of was a bit aggressive in his first couple of years, and that's definitely that reputation has clung on to him quite strongly. And now he's proved sort of 2 years ago, last year, and this year that he is actually a very good driver and he has honed his racecraft. He's got that talent, but just no one seems to still kind of want him. I guess it was different with Gasly in the sense that you almost kind of knew that he could go to Alpine because they wanted that sort of French nationality kind of based team. I don't know where Yuki can go.
I mean, the early
The only
argument
real
was
option
it
there
was
is Aston Martin because of Honda again. Yeah, like you were saying there, but in order to do that, they've got to get common sense and get rid of Stroll. So
the only other real possibility for him would have been something like Williams, and he goes and joins his old teammate again, Albon. But that's looking like a bit of a closed route. And equally, Williams would then just simply start to be the sort of retirement home for broken Red Bull drivers. So it's a bit of an odd one. But anyway, speaking of Williams, James Vowles wants Carlos Sainz. And this is something that he's sort of finally been pinned down and made to confirm. The Ferrari driver and three-time Grand Prix winner is at the top of the list to join Williams, according to their team principal, all but confirming Sargent's departure because, of course, Albon has already signed on for another season or so. This isn't particularly surprising news, but it is worth making note of because it means Ellie May gets ever nearer to making her dreams come true for her favourite team as they would climb their way back up to the top with a very solid driver lineup of Sainz and Albon, actually.
They'd still remain as Red Bull drivers.
Yeah, both of them have been Red Bull Paddock.
Yeah.
True.
I did also find it hilarious that of all the weekends for Vowles to say this, who gets tangled up with whom during the Grand Prix signs an album. I was like, oh, come on. Could you not just wait one Grand Prix before you do that and not have to do it immediately?
The Drive to Survive script writers were really busy with that one. They'd sort of heard that mentioned in the paddock and went, you know what we need to do.
But yeah, it'll be a really nice lineup, next year and the year after when you've got Albon, Carlos Sainz at Williams with Adrian Newey as head of Aero.
Have Williams had a Spanish driver before? I don't know why this is a question that I'm suddenly asking. I feel like they almost certainly must have done. Marc Genet, 2003, came 5th in the Italian Grand Prix. He then stuck around, came 10th and 12th in 2006 at the French and British Grand Prix before being replaced by Antonio Pizzonia.
If you extend it to Spanish speaking, you've got Maldonado.
Yeah. Is national language of Venezuela Spanish or is it Portuguese? Oh, it's Spanish, yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah, so only one Spanish driver. So it'd be great because Carlos Sainz, second ever Spanish driver for Williams. Anyway, that was a bit of a left-wing point. But speaking of Williams, though, great weekend for their junior driver, their development driver, Jamie Chadwick, who wins in Indy Next. First female race winner in the series for 15 years. Pole position meant she was the third woman in history to do this and the first on such a circuit as well. First one to do it on one of their street or road courses. And just a really excellent drive, win from pole. I'm fairly certain she led every lap of it as well. So a properly class outing and great support from both the fans that were there at the circuit. It was Road America and also from all the other drivers, both in Indy Next and in the big league Indy series, who were all properly blown away by it and genuinely pleased for her performance. So a really nice thing to see across the weekend.
Yeah, her teammate Louis Foster was lined up next to her on the grid, tried making a move straight away into turn one and went very wide, which luckily you can do there and get away with it just about. And she just had none of it then, and then just controlled the race. I mean, we're used to seeing her at the front primarily in W Series, so we know she knows how to lead. And when the caution came out 3 from the end, you're just thinking, oh, great, this is where it all unravels through no fault of her own. And then she just managed to keep a calm head on herself and just went for it. And she led every lap. She did what she needed to do. And during the race, one of the comms people for Indy Next went to talk to Michael Andretti and went, oh, so tell us everything. Are you coaching her a bit? Does she need anything to do that? And he just went, no, she knows what she's doing. She knows what to do out there. And just this quiet confidence in her. And like, yeah, it's Jamie Chadwick. She does know a thing or two at this point in her career. She's not just coming into this at 15 years old and we're just throwing a Hail Mary. She's not got here by accident. And it's interesting because first one to win on a road or street course, which is interesting considering Road America, you'd not necessarily call that a track generally, but that's a debate for another day. And Beatrice won on ovals in Nashville back in 2008 and in Iowa in 2009. But then the last time we had a woman win in this category was Pippa Mann on an oval as well in Kentucky in 2010. So it's been a while, but it was nice to see her just do it all on merit. And pole position, I'd have been satisfied enough with that and maybe podium. So to see her just commandingly take the win and not let the pressure get to her and propel herself up the championship standing in the process by the end of the race, lovely.
But anyway, we'll move on from working one bit of stateside to a bit further north stateside, and we'll take a look at the Grand Prix. And I suppose we ought to really touch on quickly how fantastic that qualifying session was. Changeable conditions throughout, drivers having to make gambles with setups, with tyre choices, really forcing drivers to sort of make a one and done run work with the inters or with whatever sort of compound tyre they were going to run. And the net result was, for only the second time since going to trip figures in point seconds, we had a complete tie for the front row. Of course, George setting it first, so he got pole with Verstappen right behind him. But yeah, this is one of the sort of closest top five in qualifying since Brazil 2003, where the top five was spread between 0.178 of a second. I think it's Barrichello, Coulthard, Webber, Raikkonen, and Jarno Trulli filling out the top five there. So genuinely an absolute bonanza of driving.
And within 4 teams as well.
Yeah, we've got 4 teams competing for that top end of the field, which is something that we've not really expected from this season, was the fact that we'd have 4 teams competing for the front end of not just the grid, but also for the race win at points as well. So it's jolly exciting.
One of them was an RB as well.
Yeah, that was very unexpected.
Basically, an RB of Daniel Ricciardo, just timing that to perfection for comments we'll get to later.
Yeah, we'll get to that later, but possibly fueled by Fury.
I only made one note in my Canada notes, which was labelled qualifying thoughts. And it was that if I didn't know who Jacques Villeneuve was, he was part of the Sky Sports commentary this weekend. For those who sort of don't know, which is why I was thinking about Jacques Villeneuve. He doesn't tend to occupy my thoughts, just in general.
And everyone listening let out a sigh of relief.
If I didn't know who he was, and someone told me that he's best known for his role as Lex Luthor, I'd believe them.
He's always been
for more Austin Powers tribute.
He's always been known for strong hairstyle choices, but I mean, you mean to tell me that IndyCar, well, it was Champ Car at the time he did it, wasn't it? You would mean to tell me that Champ Car Championship winner Jacques Villeneuve does not live rent-free in your head, 1995?
Well, he did famously have that very good stint in Formula E, didn't he?
Yeah, that too. He was always a very tricky one to remember in pub quizzes. But yeah,
for some people, yeah.
Yeah, for
and that music career.
Yes, his very often unsung, and rightly so, music career.
Before we get into the Grand Prix itself, though, my one note on it was an interesting bit of Martin Brundle's commentary, which I don't know if either of, well, anyway, you won't have picked up on because you don't watch feeder series, but Jesse, you may have, was he clearly listens, or at least watches or listens to Alex when he's doing commentary, or at least talks to him about it afterwards, because I can't remember who it was about during the race, but he made the comment of there's a bit of braille parking there, which is exactly word for word the same thing that Alex Brundle said about the F3 pile-up on lap 1 in Monaco. And I just went, I had my Leonardo DiCaprio moment. I know that.
Yeah, pointing at screams of yeah, I think it's.
I just thought it was really sweet.
I think it's very much a case of like father like son with those two, and the fact they both clearly have a little phrase they enjoy. But yeah, I think we'll get on to Jacques Villeneuve in due course. And we'll sort of jump into some fun facts as we go into the Grand Prix, because there are, of course, 2 sort of nice milestones that were actually a bit overlooked this weekend. One was Hamilton now having the longest F1 career of a British driver, surpasses Button's record. Starting the Grand Prix, he then clocked over to 17 years, 2 months and 22 days, which is quite the achievement, really.
Whilst we're on Hamilton, I don't know if you saw Martin's interview with the wonderful lady of
Brilliant interview.
Mm.
She was Hamilton's guest actually for the weekend,
He's
and she
working on a
started.
documentary about her. That's why.
Ah,
I
because
do love how he's just low key doing this stuff and just other people just make a big song and dance about it. It's just like, she's here. Yep.
Yeah.
yeah, an amazing lady. I mean, she started racing sports cars in 1957, switched to motorcycles, continued to ride them until 2012. Um, so when Martin asked her, is this your first F1 race? She said no. I've met Jim Clark, and but yeah, she's the first woman to enter the Baja 1000 and the only woman to finish the Baja 500 solo.
Mm. I think her phrase on Jim Clark was, I met Jimmy Clark at Road America or no, Willow Springs or something when an F1 race there. It was something sort of incredibly quick and cutting, and you're like, go on, get him, Mary. It was, yeah, genuinely fantastic. But yes, yeah, there is a documentary coming out about her in due course. I think it's being produced and sort of driven by Lewis and his TV and film production company. So it's going to be quite an interesting one to see emerge. The other record that we saw tumble this weekend was Alonso setting a new record for longest time between first points and most recent points, 21 years and 3 months on the nose. I don't know who held it before. I'm assuming him, but it could be
Maybe
somebody.
Kimmy.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah,
maybe
Kimmy sounds
Raikkonen.
about right. Yeah. Um,
His points can now drink in America.
Yes, yeah. Alonso's points records are now legal to drink in America. So some interesting bits there. So we might as well jump into a race where Alonso famously has now scored points. And we'll take a look at the results. And we'll start with Red Bull. Thiemo.
Not much to say on Verstappen. I mean, it was just nice to see him work for it for a change because it kind of in the same way that Imola, I didn't mind that he won there because you could tell he had to put in a bit of a championship performance there and proved why he is the driver he is. That oh, there's a bit of pressure. I'll just deal with that and still going to keep Norris behind me and go and win. Doesn't matter how much I win by, I'll still win. And this is very much that. It was the team working together nicely. They're in a comfortable spot. So whilst it would have been nice to see someone else win, I'm not mad that it was him because he had to fight for it and it wasn't guaranteed. With regards to Perez, because I know you want to say a thing or two on him, I kind of want to echo what I said with you last week, Eddie, mate. I think because of the season being or feeling as long as it has so far, that's why people, you, Jesse, being one of them, are maybe giving him more of a hard time than he warrants. Because it's only really, excuse me, since Imola this dropped off. P11 qualified in Imola, P16 then qualified in Monaco, and same for Canada. In admittedly, Monaco didn't go great, and neither did Imola or Canada in the grand scheme of things, but up to that point, his lowest qualifying position was sixth in the China sprint race. And he's had a couple of podiums early on in the season, and it's one of these things. He's not been there where he needs to have been, in case in point being Australia. That should have been his win because that's his job. That when Max doesn't win, he's in the car that is capable of doing it the most. And he fell short there and became kind of he still finished all right, but again wasn't excellent there. But I think he's in this weird rut at the moment, and it's again unfortunate that this performance comes after he gets a contract extension, as seems typical of well, most drivers whenever they get a contract extension, they immediately do bad. I mean, look at UKIP this weekend. Here's an extra year. Oh crap. Again, we will have off weekends, but I think we can worry about Perez more if he doesn't get at least one or two podiums before the summer break. Because I think if that doesn't happen, then fair enough. I will just not say anything and let Jesse rage for however long it takes. But at the moment, I'm still weirdly, just for the sake of balance, wanting to go in and bat for him, even though I've got no personal stake in this whatsoever. We know he's good, but he's just got a funny way of showing it sometimes, and he just needs to have some more solid results. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom for him just yet.
Because obviously coming into this race, we knew that the Red Bull would struggle, or we thought it would struggle because, that car does not like curbs due to its stiffness. And so you'd probably, or perhaps maybe excuse Perez's lack of performance from that. But I think the issue is Max did really well, and he did hustle that car into first place and win on merit. And it was mainly a very calm and collected drive, and we didn't quite see that from Perez all weekend. I know obviously he did as well pick up damage early on in the race when him and Gasly made contact, but he just he didn't make any sort of railroads at all during the race at all.
Yeah, there was no progress, was the thing from Perez. He wasn't really sort of making his way up through the field, and it's a circuit that you could overtake at. We saw across the weekend a lot of overtakes being made, including a double overtake from Alex Albon, which I'll definitely get to. But even sort of in the early stint with the Hasses on the full wet tyres, they were able just to sort of drive around people. And if you're in a car that supposedly got the dominance of the Red Bull, and the fact that at one point it did open up a huge lead over Norris and Russell behind, it's a car that was clearly capable around Canada, and yet we weren't seeing the performance from it that we would have anticipated or did see from Verstappen. And yeah, I mean, my notes, good display of the usual competency from Max, still struggling a bit with the car as a team. Bumpy tracks are not working well on their side for the ride height and suspension, we've already mentioned. We obviously saw the engine getting replaced as well because of an MG power unit issue. And then, yeah, Perez, I'll get to him. I think it's kind of obvious where he's going to fall later on in this podcast if you know the structure for me. But yeah, I think I'm not going to get into a full sort of red-faced rage mode about him. I think at this point it's just getting a little bit.
He's not Ocon. You're not going to go into bat for him
No.
as you would the Frenchman.
No, but I think the argument is that when we're seeing such a hold-up of talent coming through, and then you've got a sort of a bit of a streak forming here, if he's able to undo it going into Canada, Britain, and Austria, I'll eat my words. I'll be happy to say that, look, if he's able to, if it's simply a case of where the car isn't good, he really struggles more so than Max might, fair enough. When the circuits get good, if he gets good again, I'll sort of eat my words. But at this point in time, it's looking like an unfortunate pattern that he's starting to build up. And I don't know how long they're going to be able to sort of carry on with that, because this is the second weekend in a row that McLaren has outscored Red Bull. And there is a Constructors' Championship going on in the background of all this, remember. And Red Bull, while they are accumulating points, there are teams around them that are accumulating more.
I do think, going back to Perez, with the sort of crash that he did and then going back to the pits and that being deemed unsafe and him getting a penalty for that, I think that might be a little bit harsh. I mean, I don't think that's completely on him, and I kind of understand their logic of if you can bring back the car to the pits and not bring out a safety car, go for that. And obviously they didn't know that that was kind of an offensive thing to do.
I think that
I just thought immediately
on the
Gunter
team.
Steiner would have been on the phone going, "Gosh, like it's dangerous, it's dangerous." Any kind of anything wrong with the car, I'd just be on the phone, regardless of if he's with the team or not. Yeah, it's also insane that Max has got 50 wins out of the last 75 Grand Prix or something silly since the start of 2021, and yeah, no, that's just mad. No,
It is
Yeah.
a bit crazy that that's the domination we've seen over like just a specific set number of races. But yeah, I think when it comes to Red Bull as a team, the sort of not immediately telling him to retire that car and park it up, like what good is it going to be you bringing it back to the garage? You can start taking it apart quicker. You're not repairing a rear
well, they
wing
could
mid-race.
they could have buffed it out a bit. Would have been fine.
No,
Kept on
Do
kept on racing.
that do that taping job that AlphaTauri did on
Yeah.
Yuki Tsunoda's
It-
car.
it needed a bit more than speed tape. I'd argue the only reason Red Bull wanted it back was so they could start getting packed down quicker. Like at that point, telling them to park it up at the side of the circuit, all they've done there is fumble it a bit and cost themselves 3 places at the next race. And if he
To
keeps
echo
up his
what we were saying
current,
about earlier on the next 2 races, it's kind of good that he's got that penalty, because if Red Bull is as good as we expect them to be in Spain, then that shouldn't be an issue, regardless of if he starts as low as 4th. You know, it should still be fine for him to get through the field, regardless of where he qualifies there. So that's going to be another interesting way to measure their success
yeah.
and performance next time.
But if
Was-
his qualifying stays the same as it has done the previous 2 races, he's going to be starting the race from 19th.
Was Verstappen in the lead when Perez crashed?
Good question.
Because obviously then that's the obvious reason of why they do not want a safety car to back up the bunch again.
Yeah, immediately compress the field once more.
Especially when you had Norris early on in the race being that quick.
I don't think that would have made a difference though, because Max was never really worried about Norris for that entire race, so he would have just got away from
No,
him at some point anyway.
but
Checo
Red
retired
Bull might have been.
on lap 51, and at lap 51, Verstappen was already leading. So yeah, they possibly didn't want Perez to cause a safety car. So they said, look, limp it home and go from there. But equally, if he was able to just sort of actively park it up at like a Marshall point where you can sometimes just simply drive your car off the circuit, that would have probably been a smarter move. But yeah,
I think the issue with Canada is there's not many of them, is there?
there's not many holes in the fence, no. So there's not a lot. You have to sort of send out a crane to go and pick it up and sort of drag it back in. There's not. It's not like a sort of, I want to say, a Silverstone where you can just sort of wheel it through a gap and away you go. You're done, sort of thing. So yeah, an interesting one there. But I think there's a lot still to be seen with Red Bull when it comes to the next few races as to whether we know this is inherently a Perez thing or if this is a car thing or quite what the cause is. We'll move on to a team that should be relatively easy to talk about, Ferrari.
First double DNF since Baku 2022, and that is literally all I have written down there.
It's just a terrible weekend, really. I mean, both were sort of off pace, both struggled, whether that be sort of Charles with reliability issues or Carlos with his spin. I mean, with Charles not scoring, Max has pretty much doubled his lead. Leclerc could win 2 races and Verstappen could finish with no points, and Verstappen would still be in the lead. I think that's the kicker here.
Yeah, it's something like a 60-point gap, isn't it? So there'd still be 10, even if Verstappen retires for the next two and Charles wins, even with fastest lap, you're still looking at an 8-point lead. And that's still something that would be struggled to overcome. Yeah, rough one. I think the interesting thing for me was Carlos's accident was a bit careless. I think he was unfortunate in the way the car went round, but then the fact that I think it was Martin Brundle that said, in reality, if he had sort of gotten on the brakes once it had gone round, he might have stood a chance of it not backing itself across the track and into Albon. But I think at that point, that's sort of, you're talking in sort of retrospect, it's hindsight, which is always 2020. I think in that moment, you're mostly trying to figure out why you just went round and also trying to recover it. You're not sort of thinking about backing it down, and also you're not thinking about stalling the car. You're grabbing the clutch pedal, getting the clutch pulled, so you're not stalling the engine. Otherwise, you're screwed. And
I'd
that
say
is a
careless is
retirement.
probably a little bit harsh, but I think it's just one of those with the nature of the track and everything that day. It was just, it could have happened to anyone. It was just unfortunate that it was him because he shouldn't have been down that far in the field in the first place. So it just kind of compounded what was already a difficult weekend. But I wouldn't say careless. It was just, you do so many laps at some point, law of averages, you're gonna not do it perfectly. And unfortunately, at that point, the track was in the condition that it was, and it just had more of an impact than it would have necessarily done if it was a dry track.
Yeah, I think overall I'm going to chalk this one up as a bad weekend and move on. And I think that's probably the best thing to do with for Ferrari is go, okay, we didn't learn a lot there. We learned a lot on probably how we should not set up our cars for wet races. Next thing, and next thing for us is Mercedes, and I think we've all got a fair bit to say about this one.
Yeah, kind of very much a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one because no one, including Mercedes, were probably expecting this kind of performance from themselves this weekend. Russell with an excellent pole position lap, then converting it to P3, which, yeah, not a brilliant conversion if you want it, but again, probably if you'd told us P3 and P4 for Mercedes coming into the weekend, we'd have gone, yeah, all right, we'll take that because they've not done too well this year so far. It's their first podium of the year. Hamilton with the fastest lap and disappointed himself, which I kind of both love and hate at the same time because the man's just too harsh on himself sometimes, but that's how he gets to where he is. And I think if we can have another crazy race this year, Silverstone, Singapore, Austin, or Brazil, for example, we might just get a Mercedes victory and maybe one more Hamilton win for the Silver Arrows before he leaves. But I think this was just a breath of fresh air in the same way that Monaco was a breath of fresh air in very different ways. This was kind of what we needed. And it's a shame that it couldn't convert, but it was this kind of thing where you can't count everyone out. And there's going to be maybe not a consistent element to this, but every now and again, someone unexpected, in the same way that Haas looked like they were onto something very early on, kind of threatened it, and then Mercedes kind of did what you kind of hoped they would do, but haven't been able to this year. At other races, maybe other teams would do this, and they've got nothing to lose and everything to gain from having this kind of approach, and I'll be intrigued to see how much that changes rather to the front wing that they made helped in doing this, because a lot of attention was put onto that. So yeah, just isn't that?
Yeah, I agree. I think Mercedes won't always be on it as much as they were this weekend. And, you know, Canada has no real high-speed corners, which the likes of sort of Silverstone and Spa does. So it'll be interesting to see how they then sort of fared there. But it does seem that they do have a better handle on the car, and that side of things is getting much better. They understand where they sort of have gone wrong, and they can now sort of make it better. I think the main takeaway for me is that George needs to calm down. I think with the amount of silly mistakes he's made this weekend, especially as it seems to be a bit of a recurring theme when he's running quite high up in the order, I think he's beginning to realize that he needs to learn how to cope better in those situations. He almost needs sort of a coach to help him psychologically break down what is going on in those moments and how to cope better. Because if Mercedes end up being in championship contention again in the future, those mistakes could be what cost George the championship. And I think it's better to sort those issues out now before it becomes too much of a problem in the future.
I think that's one of those examples where you can see the deficit that Mercedes have because Niki Lauda's not around anymore. Toto comes on the radio much more frequently in the last few years to try and calm either one of them down whenever they're having a bit of a moment. It doesn't necessarily work as well as you'd like it to. Whereas if it was Niki, even on or off track, probably more off track, he would be able to take you aside and go, right, we're sorting this out in the same way that Mark Webber probably does with Piastri, and why Piastri is so cool under pressure. And I think that's they need someone in there to do that, like you say, Ellie May. And I think as well, it's that combination of things of it came into Mercedes at the wrong time in some ways, because you think, oh, brilliant, we get to see Russell after what we saw him do in Sakir. He's going to be up there and the Mercedes make a duff car. And he's thinking, oh no, not Williams again, slightly better Williams, but it's not there. So he's not getting those opportunities as much as he would like. So he's just not had that experience under his belt yet to be able to cope with that pressure, like you say. And so these mistakes do creep in a little bit. But I think, at least with him, you know there is the potential there for it. Whereas with other drivers, you know that that's probably a one and done opportunity to get a race win. And yeah, you've binned it. So with him, it's kind of he just needs to just calm down a little bit, I think, but not in a patronizing way, in a kind of you know what to do. You just need to be a bit more zen.
Yeah, and I think George certainly has that mentality in him that I think he knows that something needs to change, and I think he has got the mindset that he can change things. He's not going to be sort of one of those drivers that sees his mistakes and then doesn't do anything about it or gets more frustrated. I think he's got it in him to take these lessons and learn from them, and this make him a better driver for it.
Yeah, I think the George aspect is definitely one that I've sort of been looking over. I want to see more from him, and I know that he does too. We know he's got a race win in him. We've seen it. It's sort of often easy to actually forget he's already banked one in. But yeah, I think he is a bit like Lando in the fact that he can be hypercritical of himself when things aren't going his way, and he forgets to leave that at the side of the track. I think that's where we sometimes see those problems just creep in at the very precipice of sort of pressure at the moment where it counts the most. But yeah, overall, I think for Mercedes, it's looking good, and I'm not a big Mercedes fan, but I'm hoping that this wasn't a flash in the pan. There was some excellent pace from both cars, and the two of them having a proper ding dong, both of them up and down the grid all the time. It was fantastic, and I think as a neutral fan of them, and as a fan of the sport, this is what we want to see. Is we want to see a team sort of developing, getting there, and the driver lineup they've got now that they're getting a better car is really going to be quite an interesting one, because George not being being completely unafraid to challenge Lewis Hamilton when they say, yeah, we're not stopping you from fighting, and he goes, all right, send it into the chicane. It's interesting. I think we're going to see some exciting things from them towards the sort of second half of this season, and yeah, I'm excited for Mercedes, which is a weird thing for me to say, certainly. We've got nothing else to say about Mercedes. We'll shuffle on then to one of their customer teams, and McLaren, Thiemo.
scored points in Canada for the first time in a decade. Is that not insane? And just shows you how dire they were at a point in time and how nice it is that they're ending these kind of streaks at the moment in places that you'd think, wait, what? Magnussen was the last guy to score points for them? Bloody hell. But that being said, Piastri's time is coming and I cannot wait because I feel like he just keeps getting hung out to dry and he's just, if he's mad about it, you can't tell. And I love that because he kind of leaves it out. Kind of, he does what he does in the race, and he comes on team radio, like he was saying, like, "Oh, do you think if we let you pass Lando, you can go and challenge Max?" Like, I'm kind of a bit busy here. I don't. I think I've got my hands full.
Yeah, he was
And
busy
if he's mad
fighting
about
off
anything,
Russell.
he deals with it. Yeah, deals with it out of the car later and out of the public eye, which a lot of drivers need to take note of that. I can't wait for him to finally get that race win. And I still think him winning at Silverstone would be fantastic if Hamilton or Russell can't. I think it's just kind of we would adopt him in the same way that everyone else is adopting him at this point. It doesn't feel necessarily patriotic to support him, but it kind of does at the same time. It's that weird trying not to say a certain word extension of Britain there. But you know, it's kind of it's quite easy to be a fan of him in the same way that it's quite easy to be a fan of Lawson, of Ricardo, of Webber. You know, it's just he's a really nice, solid driver who hopefully can be a world champion one day. And I would love the first race win for him to be an old school proper circuit because again, that just adds to the mind games that I want to happen at McLaren.
Mm.
He has to have one of the coolest heads out of all the drivers. I mean, he has a fantastic mentality. But yeah, I think it's a shame Lando didn't get the wins. Sort of, what was it, 56th anniversary of Bruce McLaren's first win in a McLaren. But there are so many positives to take away from both drivers. And that car at one point was by far the fastest on track. I think Norris was lapping over 2 seconds quicker at one point. I mean, he took the lead completely through his own skill alongside having a competitive car to do that in. McLaren is slowly becoming, hopefully, a championship winning car, and they've got two drivers who can bring it as well.
I think certainly when it comes to Piastri, that is, we've sort of already said it, he is a driver that does his talking on track and then does even less talking when he's off track. He just sort of goes, okay, yeah, well, we did the best there. We'll try harder next
He's
time.
one of these drivers that I feel like we've got such a lack of them these days because it's only Lewis and Alonso left from yesteryear, where he could be that kind of driver if he's not caught up in the things that the kids are down with these days to go really bad jokes on this. And he's just kind of very old school in everything, and you can tell that Mark Webber is the influence. But I love that because we need at least one or two drivers like that to kind of. He's already a statesman of the sport in a weird way, despite it being his second season. You can tell that he's never really going to let anything get to him unless something calamitous happens.
He
But
behaves
even then,
very much like the
I
old
still
guy.
feel like
Yeah.
he would just be calm and just be like, yeah, you could picture him going multi 21 Seth, but that'd be kind of the extent of his anger.
I don't think
He's
he'd be that bitter. He'd be like, oh, well, what happened today was an unfortunate scenario for the team, and I think we'll be looking back on it and moving forwards. I think that would be the limit as to what he would say. It'd be something as diplomatic and plain as that. He's
an unbothered king.
Yeah. Have you seen the photographs of him in the club in Monaco, obviously celebrating Charles Leclerc's sort of win? He's there with his girlfriend, and they're just sort of both sat on the sofa in the club next to each other, just clearly going, is it too early to leave? Like, meanwhile, Charles Leclerc is sort of hidden beneath a Monegasque flag. Carlos Sainz is the drunkest you've ever seen a human being, unless you saw me at the quiz a few years ago. And then there's just Oscar and his girlfriend sitting there going, I think it'd be a bit rude if we left now. We'll give it another 15 minutes. But yeah, he's genuinely an incredible talent. And the fact that he just is able to focus so purely on the circuit, I think that win is coming. At the moment, he is up there and driving at the exact same pace and caliber as I'd say Norris is, within sort of 99% of it, certainly. And then, like I said, Norris...
He's kind of doing what you'd expected from Norris when he came in, if that makes sense. I know the car wasn't always there, but it's kind of with the reputation that Norris had when he came into the sport, Piastri's having the results that we thought Norris would get, but a lot sooner.
Yeah. And Norris is having a really good time of things at the moment with the car. We're getting those sort of regular point scoring finishes. The car is there. He is there. He is there certainly on track. I think he's loving life, obviously, beyond the circuit at the moment and having a great time. But it's not serving as a distraction. It is, you're still getting 100% of the determination and the focus when he arrives at the circuit. And it's, again, it's very old guard of him in almost the sort of the 70s, 80s party boy way. And I absolutely love that as well, because it's bringing a very different dash of character to the team, but it's not distracting. It's not sort of ruining his race weekends. And it is, yeah, the immense pace that he had chasing down Max. Absolutely love it.
I almost don't want to say this, but I think now, obviously, Leclerc's DNF, McLaren are now the only drivers to have finished every single race this year, and I think Norris is the only one to finish within the points.
Yeah, Norris is definitely the only one. He was. I don't know about Piastri if he's finished every. I think he's finished every race, but yeah, I think you are correct.
Are we including sprints in that? Because of course Norris Miami sprint did not finish.
No, actual Grand Prix
Race.
Just actual Grand Prix. Then yes, he's finished every Grand Prix in the points. Piastri, yeah, only his P13 at Miami really lets him down there. Everything else has been just as consistent as Lando. Everything in the top 8. So yeah, it's the consistency is there from those drivers, and I think if they're able to keep that up as a team, like I said, in the past few race weekends, they've been outscoring Red Bull. If they're able to keep that up and keep that pressure on and keep getting between Max and Checo in the finishing results, the Constructors' Championship is going to get interesting. I mean, it's good at the moment. You've got Red Bull on 301, Ferrari 252, and then McLaren 212. It seems like a big spread, but bear in mind they're accruing points at twice the rate. So it's good. It's looking good.
And I tipped McLaren to win the championship this year. So
Did you?
yeah, in my predictions, I said
Oh yeah,
McLaren.
you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
None of us picked Red Bull, which could actually be true this year. Red Bull could come second. Interesting. Anyway, move on from McLaren to Aston Martin, who didn't really have a bad race, nor did they have a good one. It was just a bit of a quiet one, picking up points.
Yeah, I don't really have much notes on Aston Martin. Like you said, they just quietly got on with it, really. You obviously saw Alonso keeping Hamilton behind him until sort of the pit stops. I'm not too sure what happened there. We didn't actually see it happening on TV. And Stroll just got on with it to sort of have a good home race.
Stroll had a very much a nowhere race, just sort of sat in the middle on his own, doing his own thing. Alonso, the early gamesmanship between him and Hamilton going into the hairpin, beautiful, like proper old school Alonso Hamilton at McLaren, really duking it
So
out,
these guys have
trying
been
each other
going
on the
at it for
brakes.
so long, and it's so nice to still see them doing it after all this time, and you're just like, oh, I could watch it all day.
Yeah, it was so beautiful watching those sort of opening 12, 15 laps where it's everyone sort of going, oh, it's still really wet. We're waiting for the next rain to come in. And meanwhile, they are just going hammer and tong at each other into the hairpin, trying different lines, fending the gaps, making the spaces, forcing one to go the other way. Lovely stuff. And at the end of it, good cluster of points for Aston Martin, keeps them clear of the Minardis behind. The car is coming together, but they've got a long way to go to chase down the boys ahead of them.
And the only reason I've written double points, motherfuckers, is because I actually got a prediction right, which we'll get to later. So it's just a weird joy from Aston Martin, and I had to rely on Stroll to get a point. It's a mad old time.
Yes, a mad old time indeed.
When we do the rally next weekend, our entry number is Lance Stroll's.
We're at number 18.
It was nice knowing you both.
We'll be fine, probably. Anyway, we'll move on to possibly a section where it's going to get quite an interesting conversation. Minardi, RB, Visa Cash App, RB Racing. Thiemo, I'm going to start with you.
I've written here, Jacques Villeneuve can go and eat a bag of dicks. And I'll tell you for why. Because sure, Ricardo's not performed as well as we'd have liked him to this season. But He is a driver with 8 Grand Prix victories in places such as Canada, Monaco, Baku, Monza. The list goes limitedly a bit more on. He's got 3 pole positions, same as Perez, and sits at the moment P12 in the Drivers' Championship, ahead of Hulk, Gasly, Albon, Ocon, Magnussen, Joe, Bottas, and Sargent. Technically Behrman as well, but we're going to be nice to him. And if I'm going to be asking why he's still in F1, I'd look at these drivers first, as they're all below him in the standings. Hulk and Albon maybe being the exceptions because Albon's just solidly good, needs it Williams, and Hulk has been able to outperform himself, and he's kind of had a very long and interesting career. And kind of echoing what you were saying earlier about Perez, Jesse, it's kind of like he's filling a seat that some young, fresh talent could go in the form of Liam Lawson or Yuki Tsunoda, and then Lawson could fill in Yuki's spot, for example. So it's it just screams of trying to create headlines and stay relevant and make sure that Ellie Mae doesn't mistake him for Lex Luthor, which is a fairly common thing that I feel like to do at this point. Because again, if you didn't know, I mean, that's the thing we should do at the next pub quiz. We'll get a photo of him. We'll have some people there who are just casual F1 fans who've maybe just come along and Drive to Survive. We'll show them a picture of him. I guarantee they will not know who he is, but they'll know other people like Nigel Mansell, Michael Schumacher, James Hunt. So there's something for you for later down the line.
So you're saying when we get to the
Villeneuve
pub quiz, I'll go downstairs with like a little board with 4 pictures on it. There'll be Jacques Villeneuve, there'll be a Daniel Ricciardo, there'll maybe be like a Michael Schumacher and like maybe a Graham Hill. And we'll see if we just get random people in the pub downstairs below the quiz to just sort of name the people, just sort of like a sort of test of public knowledge.
You could put his photo up in F1 Arcade and people would not notice and be wondering why they put up this random person's photograph. But Villeneuve himself only has 3 more wins than Ricciardo, and they all came in his first 2 years in the sport. He kept going, though, for another 9 years, achieving just 4 podiums in that time. You were on about a waste of an F1 seat? There's a perfect example right there. Ricciardo's got 32 podiums versus 23, and he's got 16 fastest laps versus Villeneuve's 9. And let's face it, he only became world champion because Schumacher got disqualified because of the antics in the last race of that season. Schumacher had 78 points and would have won that year. Let's face it, had he stayed out a bit of trouble there. So, as I said, Jacques can go and eat a bag of dicks.
Get some cardboard cutouts.
What to do this sort
at it?
No, for the personality quiz, I think she means the recognition quiz. Yeah.
I prefer my idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
like criticize Ricciardo, fair enough. He's not done as well as we would like him to. And yes, Yuki's doing very nicely. It's unfortunate that his race result wasn't there this weekend. But for Ricciardo to then just go and get a very nice qualifying performance, get some nice points on the board, you've got to admit it's quite funny to then go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's actively motivation, but I don't think this is the first time that Villeneuve has said this about Ricciardo either.
No.
And
it's not the first time he said this about a lot of people, but it's this thing of, who are you again? It's kind of, if you ask people to list, or you show people photos like we were saying earlier of all of the world champions in F1 history, I guarantee again that he would probably be one of the last people to get identified by people who aren't too sure, only with the people from the 1950s, because they're from the 1950s and they might be slightly harder to identify when you get to like Farina and these kind of people, but they're like, oh, Farina, that's that one. Who is this bald guy? Why is he relevant? And the answer is he's not really. He's only in Canada because he's Canadian, and he's weirdly the last successful driver that Canada have had, because we've been stuck with Lance Stroll for the last 47 years.
Hey, don't forget Latifi, thank you.
I was getting to Latifi, but I like Latifi, so I was going to finish on a slightly positive note before I was giving the reins back to you. So,
yeah, I think I'm going to sort of sit on the fence with this one. I think Jacques made some interesting points about Daniel Ricciardo. I think we can agree on that. But like you said, Thiemo, there are other drivers that were also sort of ideal targets for a similar sort of relatively vitriol-filled sort of tirade. And yeah, I think Daniel Ricciardo also did well to prove him wrong and had a really good qualifying, a solid drive, bagged the points, and sort of proved a bit as to why he's still kicking around. And yeah, I think this is going to be one of those strange occurrences where I do sort of agree with you, Thiemo. Not fully. I personally think the sort of history of Jacques Villeneuve in motorsport and certainly what he did in F1 is interesting. Um,
Bear in mind, he's a driver that he sued an endurance or a sports car team when he joined them because he was too slow and they dropped him.
yeah,
And he decided, I'm going to get in a hissy fit about it rather than just accepting the fact that you pushed your luck a bit on this racing monarchy.
yeah. I
Maybe
think
quit while you're behind.
there were certainly sort of aspects of him that are unique, but
Well, for me, it's the same thing of going, let's look at every driver to finish P2 in the driver standings and go, well, they're basically world champion. But they're not, because they came second, and he's the epitome of I've looked into this somehow, and it's again only because he couldn't win by himself. He needed Michael Schumacher to mess up in order to win there, and then he stayed on for another 9 seasons. It's interesting that those who can't do teach, and those who can't teach are Jacques Villeneuve.
yeah, I won't dwell on it too much more, but I think overall for Minardi, it was a good weekend for them. I think the pace was definitely in the car. It's a shame about Yuki. I think
Their
at that
qualifying was
point,
very nice
their
with Yuki
qualifying
as
was
well.
very nice. He had the pace in qualifying. I think he still needs a lot more practice in wet races. We haven't really seen a great deal of properly wet races for Yuki to get used to it. Bear in mind, Daniel's had sort of the times where we used to go racing on full wets. Yuki unfortunately joined the sport at a time where we got too risk averse to go racing on full wets. So that I feel doesn't sort of help him a lot. So he was fighting against sort of a bit of a lack of experience there. And then the team very much left him out to dry
It was
going
a
into the
very nice
final bit.
strategy, though, until the very end, where it
Yeah,
just
where the
ran out,
tires
and it was
just
like if
weren't there.
close but no cigar, and it would have
Yeah,
been very nice to get double points there for them. But
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, the strategy just
yeah.
was unfortunate for him, and the fact that the tires just ran out, under rotated the front right going into what is it, the turns 5, 6, I think it is, or 7, 8, and yeah, just the car wasn't able to respond. It understeers horrendously across the grass, loops the other way, collects the bollard you're supposed to go round, and then spits him back out onto the circuit for a second race in a row, very nearly collecting Nico Hulkenberg, who flies
So
past
Hulk's
him.
having PTSD. The
Yeah,
closeness of that was
what is it
ridiculous.
with
Like,
cars
oh,
bouncing across
even
circuits
on the
coming towards me?
replay when you've seen it happen, you're still thinking, Jesus, he's not going to make it.
Or yeah, you look at it going, how was there no damage to Hulkenberg's car? Like even a clipped bit of floor or something. But yeah, I think
What you
overall,
didn't hear was a team radio from Hulk going, a bit of poo came out of that.
yeah, that is what's usually called a brown sector. But yeah, I think for overall for a weekend for Minardi, this was a good one. Overall for Jacques Villeneuve, this might not have been what he anticipated coming out for the weekend looking like, which is to say a bit of a tit.
I mean, I haven't actually listened to what Jacques Villeneuve has said yet because obviously I was shouting at men
Understandable.
kicking a ball.
Well, this should fit in with what you were doing then. You can just continue doing
Well, anyway,
that.
it kind of finally felt like a mainly, not completely clean weekend for Ricardo, finishing the points whenever sort of he's been on to have a good weekend, something always seems to happen. This was by far Daniel Ricciardo's strongest weekend this season, maybe even since he's been back, really. I need to go look at the replay of his start infringement that gave him 5 second penalty because I'm unsure what he really did. But other than that, really clean, well executed weekend. And I think apart from his off on the grass, sort of the same for Sonoda, really. It's a shame that he sort of finished out of the points.
Mm. Yeah, it's an unfortunate one for Yuki, and certainly one that I think we're going to have to remember is not truly reflective of the effort he put in across this weekend. We'll move on from Minardi though to Williams, and
There is
Albon had been
positives
looking,
here.
yeah,
There is
Albon had been
positives.
looking in really good form, and it was just such a shame to see him wiped out by Carlos. Properly unfortunate,
When?
especially
Yeah.
after that double overtake into the
I was
chicane.
about to say,
That
you see on F1 social media all this nonsense with overtake of the month. We've actually got one now that's worthy of winning it and worthy of being nominated in the first place. It's not just some DRS nonsense. It's hardly that, but then the one on Ocon is like, oh, you're in the way. How is this full speed for you? Move. And he just doesn't. They're like, well, fine, I'll just do it myself and get around you in this really smooth manner. And just masterful. And also, Albon on pace knocked Perez out of Q1. Sargent made it into Q2 for the first time this season. There were positives there. It's just unfortunate that it all went very downhill after that.
When are they going to catch a break?
I
It's
don't know.
just,
When Carlos Sainz and Adrian Newey sign over, I don't know.
yeah. I mean, it's really unfortunate for Albon there. It's a bit like Hulkenberg in Monaco, but yeah, like we said, his overtake on sort of the RB and the Alpine showed what excellent control he had on the car. And to be honest, the other two as well had good spatial awareness to not take Albon out either. That could have ended up messy, and it ended up incredibly well executed.
Can I just remind you, one of the drivers you're saying that about is
It's
Esteban Ocon.
I know.
Yeah. I'll just write that down in my little Esteban Ocon notebook there.
I don't have anything against him.
Even a broken clock's right twice a day, Jesse.
Oh,
you know that with your predictions.
Yeah. It was a good weekend for Williams, but again, it's one of those unfortunate ones where it just doesn't translate on the paper. And I think, Thiemo, you're possibly a bit right with Sargent just isn't cut out for F1 with performances like this. I think some aspects of it were right, and then some bits of it just, yeah.
It's the thing, if you want to promote new talent up, but then you don't have anyone further up on your ladder who's you can justify giving the choice to promote without looking elsewhere outside of Formula One or the feeder series, and you're like, well, we've got to try it. And I love that they stuck with them for the full season. I love that they gave them the second season, because I still think a lot of the time you need at least 2 seasons to get the proper measure. I mean, look, if we'd just measured them all on 1 season, Yuki would be gone years ago, and we wouldn't, and Jesse would not even know that he'd be meant to be mad about it. So you do need a bit of time sometimes. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm kind of glad that it's that we got to see Sargent for as long as we got to see him, because it's not worked out, but he was given a chance. And when he's kind of the closest we've got to a rookie in some respects, because of no one else taking one on this year. I mean, you've got Piastri as the other semi-rookie, but Piastri, it's kind of reassuring for the sport that there is still a team at least who's willing to do this. When you look at stake and like, you could do with doing something radical, and you're really not, aside from the livery.
I just think, unfortunately for Sargent, he was brought into F1 a bit too early. I think he could have had another year in F2 just to sort of hone his skills a little bit more. It's kind of the same thing I fear a bit for Antonelli, in that I hope Mercedes don't rush him into Formula One.
I think with Sargent, if it was a year too early, we would have seen the improvements by now. And I don't think we are. Doesn't help that he's technically still racing with a 2023 chassis and loads of 2023 bits on the car, because all they keep doing is putting it on Albons. But I think with Antonelli, time will tell. But I really hope Mercedes don't make the mistake I anticipate they're about to make. But that's a talk for another time. In the meantime, Stake were in this race.
They were there. Pit stop was again for them, apparently.
Yeah, there was a slow pit stop for Zhou, I think. It was like another 8-seconder.
Still really like the livery, though.
Still a really good livery. Yeah.
Easy to see.
Yeah, especially
even in the rain.
Yeah.
Glow in the dark.
Yeah.
Haas. And I have to say, lining up on the grid, I see the full wets. I'm going, ooh, it's an inspired choice. And then Magnussen makes it work, and Hulkenberg makes it work. I'm watching it from the opening off, thinking if there's more rain coming, they could be on for sort of top geniuses. There was a bit in the back of my brain that possibly quite early on into a 70-lap race, about lap 5, my brain's going, could we finally see a Nico Hulkenberg podium? And
I very much felt like the scene in A New Hope where Ben Kenobi's I felt the sudden disturbance in the force. 1,000 voices cried out at once, but it was just Henry. Just all by himself, just going.
It was just
we were this close to greatness, and it's just such a shame, because they, like you say, they had an incredible opening stint with both drivers, and it's exactly what Stake should have done. You've got, as Brundle was saying, contrary, you've got nothing to lose. Why not try it? Yeah, they didn't get points, and it's mad that Alpine got double points and they didn't with what they did there. But at least they tried, and I like the ballsiness there. And talking of ballsiness, let's have a wild prediction from me. We're going to see a podium from them this year if they remain this ballsy, because we only need somewhere like Spa or Zandvoort or even Vegas to be a little bit topsy-turvy, or if Baku goes back to being what we love Baku for, which is the carnage. they could be there then, and they can capitalize, and you just it's just frustratingly close, but no cigar.
Okay, I'm writing that onto
I'm
your season-long predictions, where we've sort of picked every driver to score a podium. I'm adding to Thiemo's roster a Haas.
Just
I'm not going to
Haas.
force him to pick one. I'm going to say a Haas.
Well, because this is ridiculous enough to happen anyway.
Yeah, I'll give
I'm
you the scope.
I'm I was actually quite surprised that they were the only team to go on wets, to be fair. I honestly thought at least some teams would split strategies, at least those at the bottom, where they had nothing to lose. And I don't blame Haas for that gamble at all.
No,
I
the
think,
gamble worked.
yeah,
Unfortunately, their
it
pit
did.
stops afterwards didn't.
It
Certainly Magnussen's, where they go, box. Oh, tyres, piss. I knew I'd forgotten something.
Yeah, it worked. They just could have executed it a lot better, like you said, for when they pitted for Inters, and they could have at least had Magnussen in the points with that sort of real gamble that nobody else took.
Mm.
Ferrari could have taken that for God's sakes. They had nothing to lose.
It
Perez.
felt like they were going to put Magnussen in the points at one point because Hulk was holding all those cars up in the train. Magnussen was getting closer and like, oh, if he can just hold them up for a bit longer, Magnussen could carve his way through, and he kind of does what Magnussen did for him in Saudi, and then it's just push it too long. But I just think it's this weird, pleasant underdog story we're getting this year, where I really hope we get to see more than a pole position like we did in 22 out of them, where we get to actually see something proper. Like pole was lovely, but we want to see points. We want to see podiums. We want proper prizes for it, and they deserve it with how they're doing this year. And I like that we can actually root for them without it being a joke.
Mm.
Hasn't Stuart Haas decided to
Stop his NASCAR team.
end the season this
Yes.
year, which is a shame, but I also kind of hope it means
he's putting the money into F1.
Yeah, there's more focus on Haas to really do well.
Yeah, because Stuart Haas is pulling out of NASCAR, so it might free up a bit of Gene Haas's time and money, and maybe he'll pull a bit of Tony Stewart's mouse towards the F1 team. We'll wait and see. It'd be nice to see them finally get a proper reward for their efforts. And then there's Alpine. And
Such a shame that Doohan couldn't get a proper run in FP1. We were saying, Ellie May, you and I, in the preview that it's going to be quite nice to see after all the Monaco stuff what he can do. Just because we like Doohan and we want to see him in car, just to see what time he's going to put on that. He's probably going to be 20th because most times drivers get into a car for FP1, they are last. But you want to see what that margin is like. You want to see what they do differently, and we just didn't really get anything there. But triple point was something that none of us would have predicted, even in our world predictions. And somehow they could still have been worse because they could have been stake. But the last thing I just have to say on them is what a weekend for me to put Gasly in my fantasy F1 team because he was cheap and I didn't have any money after I moved some stuff around.
Great choice.
Yeah, it puts Alpine 3 points ahead of Williams, only 2 points behind Haas. And as well, I was actually quite impressed by Gasly's control over the car when Perez tagged him. Could quite easily just crashed.
Yeah. I've still got Williams ahead of Alpine for some reason.
I think they're 3 points ahead, aren't they?
Or wishing.
Alpine.
Because they are ahead of them now, unfortunately.
Oh. Yeah. That's strange. Then in which case I need to update my spreadsheets.
They are 8th.
Yes.
Which...
Williams go down to 9th and Alpine go to 8th.
As you correct your notes, how long is Stake going to go without getting any points, do we reckon?
The entire season.
Fair enough, you took mine, so we're going to agree there and get points on that at the end of the year.
I know Bottas getting points. Well, you've got to hope that Bottas gets
Points on his
'cause
super license, and he just gets banned for a race. I mean,
No, you've got to hope that Bottas gets points because you've got him down to score a podium as well.
I can sacrifice that. It's all right.
But yeah, anyway, I think it's a good weekend from Alpine. However, the one thing I will say is you can feel the chill coming off the atmosphere in that garage. Good drives from both drivers in the conditions. The car has picked up a lot, and I think the drivers are, however, done with it, each other and the team. only one upgraded chassis, and they are swapping back and forth between it is mad. Ocon, though, playing the team game, letting Gasly pass with 2 laps to go and chase down and try and pass Daniel Ricciardo,
What's
who
quite
is
amusing
miles
about
up the
that,
road.
though,
Ludicrous
was the fact
strategy. He
that
did
they
what
asked
they
him on the
wanted.
radio, swap over. He went no, and then they had to convince him for the remainder of the race. And then 2 laps before the end, he reneges, and you're like, hmm.
But also, what
mean,
was
good that you
Gasly
did
going to
it, but
do? Chase down
well,
Daniel
well, we
Ricciardo,
don't know
who's
now
like a
because there was
lap
only two
ahead?
laps, and that was kind of exactly what we can combat this sentence with we don't know because he wasn't given the opportunity. Because in 2 laps, you can't do anything.
I don't think anything was going to happen either way. I think what Ocon wanted was
Probably
simply one
not,
more
but it
point
just
than
spared
Gasly.
him.
But yeah,
I
I
think the
think
Alpine lot are really missing a trick with the marketing here because they've got clearly a civil war going on, or at least brewing. Just arrange for a charity cage match with as many of the Alpine employees and the drivers as you can, and just raise a shit ton of money for
wrong,
charity.
wrong. They need to
It's
do merch, which is a get along shirt. I
Well,
think
that's not going to
do
happen.
they
the
need to do the
that
two
get along.
t-shirts
Yeah,
stitched together as the get along shirt. They need to do it, and I think it'll be hilarious if they do.
it's almost a little bit apt for how things are going for in France, really.
Yeah, they've just called a general election as well. Perhaps that's what's happening is Ocon's plans for 2025 are actually just president of France. That's why he's not racing next year. It's like, I've had a better idea.
Just gonna run a whole nation
Yeah,
and then
I
just
can.
tax Alpine loads.
Yeah, yeah, just raise taxes on anyone producing motorsport engines in the Viry region of France. And all of a sudden, Alpine are going, what the fuck is this? And he's going, I told you to swap me and Gasly back, but you didn't.
Does that mean we can get you to put on your spreadsheet for your predictions Ocon turns into a fascist and rules France?
Um, I'll put it in the little
So I still
footnotes
like the idea
section.
of you losing a point for that at the end of the year just because it doesn't come true.
I'll put it in the footnotes section just under where we've predicted what race Oscar Piastri is finally going to get his first win. Anyway, speaking of Oscar Piastri wins, winners and spinners is our next section. And I think our winners bit we're going to sort of whistle through. Our spinners might be a bit more chatty. Winners, Thiemo, your winner.
Mercedes, for reasons mentioned earlier, and just nice to see them bounce back and hopefully not be a one-off. So yeah, short and sweet, and I'm here for it.
I can agree with you on that one. Ellie May.
I feel like I always keep going between McLaren and Ferrari, so this time I'm gonna go for RB. Yeah, I've already pretty much said mainly what I've wanted to say on them, but yeah, strong weekend, I think, really for them. Shame that Yuki wasn't in the points, but they're clear really of Haas, Alpine, Williams, and Sauber behind them. The closest is Haas, and they're 21 points behind. Aston Martin are 30 points ahead, so it might be a bit of a stretch to try and get them, but you never know.
Never know. I wouldn't count it out at this point in time. For me, though, my winner has to be Lando Norris. I think we saw an absolutely dominant display of driving, the ability to just hunt down Verstappen at that 1.2 seconds a lap quicker than the drivers ahead of him and making it work. Some beautiful overtakes, some beautiful racecraft. And also, I think F1 fans coming out of this one, I think we are also the winners because what a race. Like, first properly enjoyable race all race long. Like, it's not a race that just had a good start or a good finish. Like, all the way through,
I
this
will
was
just counter that a little bit just because I will continue to die on this hill regardless of how many discussions I have with Eddie May about it, in that this is definitely a Grand Prix that, like you say, we all very much benefited from this. It was excellent. We got a bit of everything. We got Haas early on. We got Alpine point weirdly. We got Aston Martin up, the Mercedes back, and somehow Max still wins. This is kind of the equally as good in my mind, but for very different reasons as why I love Monaco so much. Because Monaco, with these regs and these cars and everything, you know you're limited in what you're going to get there. But I think we got the best of it last time out, whereas this is kind of the best we could. Hopefully not the best actually, but working towards the best that we can get when we're not at a track like Monaco, and it's a more
yeah.
traditional street circuit. It's a more racetracky street circuit thing, and we need more of those. If we can get that kind of thing in Singapore, if we can get that at Vegas, then we're in for a fun time of it. So I think they're both very good Grand Prix for different reasons. And I think if you're a fan like me, you've had two very nice Grand Prix weekends out of that.
I mean, heck, even if you include Imola in it, which was a bit dry but had a good ongoing
That only
battle.
had a
If
good
we're
ending.
if we're able to somehow sort of imbue the spirit of those three races together for the rest of the season, I think we'll have something quite interesting on our hands.
Did anyone put Canada as the best race of the season?
Ooh, that's a question and a
Or
half.
the worst? Because they
Probably
were
not. Oh no, I mean, I
2024.
imagine I put Spain or something as the worst.
No, we didn't make people pick their favorite race of the season.
wrong.
And I did ask people to pick the four they should bin off. Um, Ellie Mae, you said Miami, so I don't know how you feel about that now.
For this year, I'll say wrong.
And Saudi. I also said Saudi. I also said Miami, actually. Thiemo said Imola. The general
Stand by it.
public said Monaco, interestingly enough.
They don't know what they want.
No, they don't. Haas chap said Miami. No one said Ben Wellham said Canada. I'm gonna go and roast him about this in a message after this. Yeah. Some interesting picks, some Imolas and Miami's in there, interesting enough, and they produce some interesting races to certainly to pick apart and talk about afterwards. Anyway, we'll jump into spinners. Thiemo, your spinner.
Fake. They should have at least attempted what Haas did, but couldn't even do that. I'm really feeling for Hulk right now as they need to sort themselves the fuck out for next year. Even Alpine managed to somehow get double points. That is how dire their situation currently is. Oh, just woeful. And I'll be intrigued by them to hear how many times I've picked Dake or one of their drivers as my spinner because it's probably going to be the majority.
How many times have we had something to say about them that wasn't anything about their pit stops?
I like their livery anyway, I tell you.
Apart from
Everything
those
else.
apart from those 2 points.
Livery and pit
I
stops
like
seem
their
to be the
livery.
2 talking points for Stake at the moment. I will agree with you and Timo on that one. Ellie Mae, your spinner.
I almost didn't want to have one because it was just such a good race, but I feel like we need to sort of talk about Ferrari. I mean, they were 24 points behind Red Bull in the championship, now 49. They're lucky Perez had such a poor race, otherwise that gap could have increased a hell of a lot more. And it puts Norris only 7 points behind Leclerc too in the drivers' standings.
Yeah, it does shake things up a bit in a negative aspect for Ferrari. For me, it's Perez. I think shoddy work, especially off the back of a contract renewal. It's not the appearance you want to be giving off. No driver wants to be the one that signs their new contract and then sort of checks out. And I think Red Bull at this point will possibly be a bit happy about it being a 1+1. Then obviously I think Red Bull fumble it a bit. This is less of a Perez moan, but certainly very much a Red Bull moan is making him limp it back to the pits and then picking up that 3-place penalty for Spain. Careless and a fault of his team more than him. But even then, his driving wasn't really setting the timing screens on fire and was most critically described as uninspiring, I think is the word I'd have to use for Perez this weekend. As a nod of, I could possibly agree with you on that from Ellie Mae. Speaking of uninspiring, though, our predictions for the weekend. Oh boy, no one
I
scored
was
a damn
inspired.
point apart from
I did.
Thiemo for his wild prediction of Aston Martin double points. The 1 point we can award is because Lance Stroll did well. What has happened to this podcast?
Look how wild I had to go, though, to get
This
a
is
point
true.
on the board.
This is very true. This clearly points out that the wilder your wild prediction, the better it is, and the more likely you are of scoring points.
I'm improving Formula One. One wild prediction at a time.
Yeah. Anyway,
I always annoyingly get sort of halfway through a race and I'll be on for a good set of points. And then something happens and I'm just not. Like at one point, I think we did have a Piastri fastest lap and we did have Lando Norris in the lead. It's like
I had a Sainz fastest lap at some point, and then that bloody went all to hell, as
yeah,
it always does.
it's like my psychic powers are kind of there, but not.
I mean, when I saw George Russell on pole, I was like, oh, piss, I really don't want my madcap prediction to come true now because I was neither Mercedes in the points. I was like, I don't want him to fall outside the points from pole, please. I quite like him.
It was when I knew I had put a 2-3 for Ferrari. I was like, I'm doomed.
Don't worry, there's more of that pain coming in a second.
Yes.
For both of you.
The
Yeah,
F1 Fantasy League.
yeah.
Who boy for
I
Canada.
felt very bad about this, and then I saw how you two got along, and I suddenly felt cheered up.
Yeah,
I have very Ferrari strong teams.
I had a very Ferrari
Yes, you did.
strong team. Yeah, we'll
And a
get to
Red Bull
that.
strong team
We
too.
we will get to that. Highest
Yeah.
scoring three teams for this weekend. Trabant Formula One team, 236 points. Lada Formula One team, 197 points, and Lecresse, 161 points. So yeah, they were our highest scorers this weekend. Our highest scoring teams is in us personally. Team Nitro RX scored 137 points. My podcast team, which I touched for ages, 96, and Extra Magnifico Terrestrii bagged 95.
I
Um,
think that's the best they've ever done. Well,
it
mine team rather, sorry.
it might be, but it's certainly not the worst because our lowest, well, Thiemo did the least worst of all of us, 61 points for his podcast team. I'm second lowest with JB Racing scoring 16 points. Carlos Sainz
What
is
a
a double,
goal.
Charles Leclerc and Ferrari as constructors. And then the lowest, Ellie Mae's team bagging -5.
Don't
I
worry, there's
don't
more
think
on
that's
that in a
the
minute too.
worst I've done.
It's not the worst you've done, but certainly the
No.
worst team this weekend. Overall, then, Take a Stroll still leads, 1986 points. What's the Racing Point, 1932, and Noah Honga, 1897. Our highest scoring teams, Team Nitro RX now in P13, Midbeds Racing P14, Ellie Mae's Pod Team P15, all within 40 points of one another, I should add. The Greatest Moustache Ellie Mae's team is still plumb last on 835 points. So there we go.
They're still, to be fair, they had Aston Martin this weekend, so they should have done better. Or they have Lance, or did I take out Lance Stroll? I'm pretty sure that it did have at some point Alonso and Stroll.
At the moment, you have in that team Bottas, Gasly, Alonso, Ricardo, Sainz, Aston Martin, Red Bull. You scored 76 points this weekend.
That's very
Ahead
good
of
for
this
that team.
weekend, I swapped out Alonso for Ricardo because how Aston Martin were doing, and I was like, oh no, what have I done? But then luckily Ricardo came through for me. But I then had an inspiration. I don't know how I think I swapped RB for Mercedes because I got rid of Alonso so I could afford them, and then had Gasly because he was cheap and all I could afford, and thought, well, we'll just see what happens. And I mean, we still all did terribly, but it helped damage limitation in a way I really wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
No matter
Anyway,
what I do, I just always seem to do poorly in Fantasy F1. So
Well, it's because you're
I,
doing well in the predictions. We can't have you doing well in both. It'd be unreasonable.
yeah, I've basically and now ignoring my Fantasy F1 team and just letting it run how it wants
The
to.
implication there was that you were paying attention to it before.
Yeah, I was. I kept changing people and it still just ended up just as bad. So I thought, you know what? We'll just stick to what I have and run with it. At least then I've, showed loyalty.
yeah. Anyway, we've been yapping on for way over an hour. It's time to draw some conclusions, as that's really all we've got for this week's episode. In the meantime, Ellie Mae, where can the people find you?
Um, Buying travel sickness tablets, travel sickness bands, reading up on how to not get travel sick whilst navigating, um, all of the above, and just trying not to get violently travel sick, which is, I think, at this point, an occupational hazard.
Yeah,
Predicting Family Guy levels of vomiting in that car this
please,
weekend.
please don't. It is a small car. It's possibly going to be quite warm in there. I do not need that in my life. Thiemo, where
I
can the people find you?
Well, this week I've got an interview out with Maria Louis Gamiero on Is It Fast and a review of Will Power and Jamie Chadwick winning in IndyCar and Indy Next over on the Across the Pond Motorsport Network podcasts coming for you. So that'll be where you can find me this week.
Beautiful stuff. And in the meantime, if you want more from me, you can, of course, find me writing for Classic Car Weekly. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok as at Jesse on Cars. On Friday, you can find me herring my way down to Cornwall to pick up a new engine for my MG before picking up Ellie Mae and going to Bicester because we're taking part in Hero ERA's Hero Challenge 2. We're doing a multitude of regularities and tests across Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and we're doing that in a 1959, I think it is, Austin Healey Frog Eye Sprite, and she will not be sick in the passenger seat. She will be accurate and dedicated with her timing, and I will pay attention to and listen to what she has to say. and we will do well.
And then next week, when I do the Spanish Grand Prix preview, I'll be taking tryouts for 2 new co-hosts because you two will at the very least be in some state that will not make you available for a podcast.
Well,
Ellie May still violently vomiting after 4 days, and Jesse we stuck up a tree somewhere,
the thing is
possibly with the car.
the main point here is you've got to listen to me.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm glad we've got that on the record because you can go and clip that back later, Ellie May, and just keep replaying it over the next few days, and then at the weekend itself.
We'll wait and see. We'll try and do a video of this as we go along. So we obviously get there for scrutineering and testing on Friday, and then we're out and about on the Saturday. So we'll try and film bits as we go along and give you a sort of behind the scenes
you know what
peek
I'd
into
like?
classic rallying. What would you like?
I would like what they do on Taskmaster. So I want to see what some of the other drivers and the navigators do. I want one of these maps where we see the route that they've all taken, and then we see the route that you've taken, Jesse, by not listening to Ellie May. And see how long it takes and where you go and all these random other places. And it's kind of look at this lovely arrow following the map along, and then there's yours that's just going in like, what is this? Is this code? Is this nonsense? Is this chaos?
Look, last time I did one, we didn't get lost, and we only picked up about 3 seconds of penalties across the whole thing, which, given it was my first time doing it, not too bad.
But the difference is you're having to listen to me.
Anyway, that's all still to come on the Undercut podcast, including our first chance to actually have a go at proper motorsport as a podcast. Fantastic. So yeah,
Might be our only
Demolition Derby.
Yeah, future attempts at doing motorsport might be just sort of a Pinewood Derby. Anyway, we'll be back.
And if you'd like to co-host this podcast, send emails to the undercutpodcast@gmail.com. I'll need new co-hosts soon.
No, it's undercutpodcastteam@gmail.com. I think the German podcast with the same name. I think the German podcast with the same name took Undercut Podcast. Anyway, we'll be back in a few weeks' time with both a preview for the Spanish Grand Prix and an in memoriam for Ellie May and myself.